"Somebody," said the Duke of Greyshaw, "is feeding my poor, and I intend to find out who." The steward blinked at him across the estate office. It was February and the fire had not been lit, and the ink had frozen in the well overnight and only now begun to thaw. "Your Grace means to find out who is feeding them. That is what I said. Forgive me, Your Grace. It is only that most gentlemen wish to find out who is robbing them." Kester Vane, 4th Duke of Greyshaw, did not smile. He very seldom did. It had been said of him in 3 counties that he had a face like the north wall of a church, and he had never troubled to contradict it. "I have counted," he said. In the coldest fortnight of the coldest winter in 9 years, in a city with 2,000 out of work at the yards, the poorhouse at Cleeve Street has taken in 106 souls. Last winter, when the weather was mild, it took 480. Explain that to me. The steward opened his mouth and closed it. "They are not dying," Kester said. "I have had the burial returns. They are not dying, and they are not begging, and they are not in the poorhouse, and they are not eating air. Somebody is feeding them, and has been, I am now satisfied, for 3 winters, and has not once come to me for a penny, or a subscription, or a word of praise at a public dinner." He put his hands behind his back and looked out at the sleet coming in off the estuary. "In my experience, there is only one sort of person who does good without wishing to be seen doing it." "And what sort is that, Your Grace?" "The sort," said Kester, "who cannot afford to be seen." He had come north to Greyshaw for the winter to escape precisely the sort of season that was at that moment being assembled for him in every drawing-room in the county. He was 36, unmarried, and possessed of an income that made him, in the frank estimation of the district, less a man than a weather system. Mothers had been observed to change route in the street in order to be met by him. He had, at the last assembly he was fool enough to attend, been introduced to 11 young ladies in 40 minutes, each of whom had been informed beforehand of the exact acreage, and each of whom had looked up at him with the same expression of practiced, radiant attention that he had come to think of as the county's chief manufacturer. Chief among them, undisputed, unrivaled, and perfectly aware of it, was Miss Seraphina Coyne. She was beautiful. He would not have insulted his own eyesight by pretending otherwise. She was the acknowledged belle of the season, the daughter of a rich shipowner with 3 ships too many and 1 name too few, and she had made a study of the Duke of Greyshaw in the way another woman might make a study of the pianoforte, with talent, with application, and with a metronome. She had discovered that he cared about the poor. She had therefore acquired a charity. "Your Grace will be pleased to hear," she said at the Michaelmas ball, laying 2 fingers on his sleeve, "that my Society for the Relief of the Deserving Indigent has distributed above 90 blankets this quarter. 90. And each one embroidered with the Society's device, so that they know whence it came." "So that they know," Kester repeated. "Gratitude," said Miss Coyne, "is so improving to them." He had looked down at her lovely upturned face and thought, with a coldness that surprised even him, that she would make an excellent duchess and that he would rather be buried at sea. Now it was February, and he stood in the sleet at the door of a soup shop on Cleeve Street, in a plain coat, with his hat down, watching. He had watched for 4 nights. On the first 3 he had seen nothing but the ordinary traffic of the poor. On the 4th, at 8:30, a covered cart came down the lane, and a woman got out of it. She was not what he expected. He did not know what he had expected, a committee perhaps. A beadle. Some fat philanthropist with a subscription list. What came out of the cart was a woman of perhaps 25 in a grey cloak turned twice at the hem, with a shawl over her head against the sleet, and she was carrying, with both arms, a great iron pot that plainly weighed more than she ought to lift. "Mind the step, Mrs. Odell," she said to somebody inside. "It has frozen again." And then, in the doorway of the soup shop, in the light of a single tallow candle, the Duke of Greyshaw saw the whole of it. There were 4 coppers going. There was a trestle. There were sacks of oats and a barrel of salt herring and a mountain of turnips. And there were 40 people in a queue that did not push, because the queue plain knew, from long habit, that there would be enough. And there was the woman in the grey cloak, moving down the line with a ladle, and she was calling them by their names. "Not my woman, not you there." Names. Kester stood in the sleet with his hat down and heard her say, "Jem, how is the hand?" "Then you'll not lift with it, and I shall know if you do." "Mrs. Tarrant?" Take 2, you have Susan at home, and she is small, and I know quite well you will give her yours. No, Mr. Odell, sit down. You are not going out in this. The boat will keep till Thursday. Nobody thanked her. He noticed that, and it puzzled him for a full minute before he understood, and the understanding went through him like the cold. Nobody thanked her, because she had made it so that nobody had to. She had made it a thing as ordinary as a well. He came back the next night, and the night after, and on the third he was recognized, not by her, but by an old man on the step who took off his cap and said, "God bless your grace," in a voice that carried the length of Cleeve Street, and Kester Vane watched every head in the soup shop come up, and watched the woman in the grey cloak turn round with the ladle still in her hand. She did not curtsy at once. She looked at him for the space of 2 heartbeats, a level, entirely unfrightened look, and what he saw in her face was not awe and not calculation, but a swift, practical dismay, the look of a woman who has been discovered and is rapidly reckoning the cost. Then she set down the ladle and curtsied and said, "Your Grace." "You have the advantage of me," said Kester. "That is very unlikely, Your Grace." Somebody in the queue laughed and turned it into a cough. "Your name," he said. "Honora Fenn." He knew the name. That was the second blow of the evening. He knew it because it was on a list in his own estate office. Fenn of Bracken Row, tenancy that had been in arrears for 2 quarters and had then, mysteriously, been paid in full and had never fallen behind since. Fenn, a clergyman's daughter, he thought. A dead clergyman and a small annuity and a cottage on his own land. "Miss Fenn," he said. "How long?" "Your Grace, how long have you been doing this?" She wiped her hands on her apron. Behind her the coppers steamed. "There is nothing irregular in it," she said. "I have not begged in your name, nor anybody's. I have not taken a subscription. If your steward has had a complaint—" "How long, Miss Fenn?" Honora Fenn looked at him, and he watched her decide as Thomason Vale had once decided about another man, though Kester Vane knew nothing of that, whether he was worth the truth. 3 winters, she said. "With what money?" "My own." "You have an annuity," said Kester, "of £60 a year." "I know it, because it is charged upon a farm that pays its rent to me. £60 will not buy 4 coppers of oats a night for 3 winters, Miss Fenn, and I am tolerably good at figures." The colour came up under her chapped skin. She lifted her chin. "Then your Grace will have worked it out," she said, "and there is no need for me to say it aloud in front of them." And he had worked it out, standing there, with the sleet running off the brim of his hat. The Duke of Greyshaw did the arithmetic of Honora Fenn. £60 a year, and a cottage at Bracken Row, and a father in his grave, and no protector, and no name in the county worth a candle, and a queue of 40 people who did not push. She had not been giving them her surplus. She had not any surplus. She had been giving them everything. The coals she did not burn, the meat she did not eat, the gowns she did not buy. That turned him. Twice she did not spend looking for a husband, 'cause a woman with £60 a year and turned hems does not get looked at twice, and she had known it, and had spent herself anyway. In the dark, on the coldest street in his city, for 3 winters, and had asked him for nothing. Kester Vane had been called cold. He had been called proud. He had been told by his own aunt that he had a heart like a locked coal cellar. Something opened in it that night on Cleeve Street, and never afterwards closed. "Miss Fenn," he said, and his voice was not entirely steady, which astonished him. "You have been feeding my people with my rents, which you paid me, out of an income that will not stretch to it, while I dined at Greyshaw on 11 courses and congratulated myself on my burial returns." The soup shop had gone entirely silent. "That is not how I would put it, Your Grace." "It is how I put it," said Kester. "Put down that ladle." "I will not," said Honora Fenn. "There are 30 people yet to serve, and if Your Grace wishes to be useful he may take that pot from the second copper, which is heavy, and which I have been lifting alone since November." There was a sound in the room like the whole street holding its breath. The Duke of Greyshaw looked at her for a long moment, and then he took off his hat and handed it to a boy, who nearly dropped it, and shrugged out of his greatcoat, and rolled back the cuffs of a shirt worth more than the building, and lifted the pot off the second copper. It was, he discovered, extremely heavy. "You have been lifting," they said, "alone." "Since November," said Honora Fenn, and went back down the line with the ladle. He went back. Of course he went back. He told himself the first time that it was a matter of estate business. He told himself the second time that a landlord ought to see his own city. By the fifth night he had given up telling himself anything, and simply came at 8 in a plain coat, and lifted the pot off the second copper, and did as he was told by a clergyman's daughter with a ladle. He learned a great deal in a fortnight, and almost none of it was about the poor. He learned that Honora Fenn slept 4 hours. That she rose at 5 to do the marketing at the fish quay, because the fish that could not be sold in the morning could be had for pennies at dawn if you were there before the cats. That she had taught herself, from a book, to reckon the cost of a man's day in oats and salt and fat, and that she carried the whole of it in her head, so that when the herring failed she knew to the ounce what must go into the pot instead. He learned that she was funny. That surprised him more than anything. She was dry and quick and quite merciless about the pretensions of the great, and on the night she discovered that the tall silent man carrying her pots had sat in the Lords for 11 years, she said, "Then your Grace has had a good deal of practice at appearing to listen, and I shall know how to value it." And he laughed aloud in a soup shop on Cleeve Street, and 40 people stared at him as though the north wall of the church had spoken. He learned that she was afraid of exactly one thing. "They will find out," she said, one night in March, sitting on an upturned crate with her hands round a cup because they had cracked with the cold. "The county. And when they do, they will make it into something. It is something. It is turnips," said Honora. "It is turnips, and it is arithmetic, and it wants no more virtue than mending a fence. The instant they put a name to it, they will put a bow on it, and then it will be a cause, and there will be a committee, and a subscription ball, and blankets with a device embroidered on them. And Mrs. Tarrant will have to stand up and be grateful in front of 90 ladies who have never in their lives been hungry." She looked into the cup. "And she will do it. That is what I cannot bear. She will do it because she is proud and hungry, and she will pay them in gratitude because it is the only coin she has. I would rather the whole thing were burnt to the ground." Kester was silent for a while. "Miss Fenn, marry me." He had not planned it. He had planned, in fact, to say nothing at all for another month, and had rehearsed a number of measured, reasonable, ducal sentences, and every one of them went out of his head and left him sitting on a crate in a soup shop saying the only true thing in it. Honora Fenn did not look up from the cup for a long moment. "Do not," she said quietly. "I am aware that I have chosen my ground badly." "You have chosen it wonderfully," she said, and now she did look up, and her eyes were bright and furious and wet, "and that is exactly why you must not. Because it is dark and it is cold, and I am useful, and you are lonely, and a man of your rank has never in his life been permitted to be either of those things where anyone could see him. In 3 months you will be in London among your own people, and I shall be a woman with red hands who smells of herring, and you will remember what you have done, and you will be too honourable to unsay it, and I will not be the making of that misery for you. No, I thank you, no." The fire in the copper hissed. "You have not asked," said Kester, "whether I have considered it. You have not considered it. I have considered nothing else since the first night, when you told me to lift a pot," he said. "I am not a boy, Miss Fenn. I am 36, and I have been hunted for 11 years by every family in 3 counties, and I have sat at a great many dinners opposite a great many beautiful young women who had been told my rent roll before they were told my name, and I have never once, in the whole of that time, been spoken to as though I were a man who might be of use. You did it inside 4 minutes. You did it with a pot of oats. That is loneliness," she said. "It is not love. Then let me tell you what the rest of it is," said Kester Vane, and he stood up, because he could not say it sitting down. "It is that you know their names. It is that you buy fish at dawn so that a woman I have never met may eat. It is that you have paid me my rent, Miss Fenn, out of £60, while sitting cold in a house on my own land, and never once come to me with your hand out, and never once used a hungry man as a step to climb by. It is that you were angry with me for 11 courses and told me so. It is that when I asked you to put down the ladle, you refused." He looked down at her. "I have been told all my life that a duke must marry his equal. I have gone 3 winters without finding one. I find I have been looking in the wrong houses." Honora Fenn put her hands over her face. "Go away," she said, muffled. "Go away, your Grace, and come back on Thursday, and do not say another word until Thursday, or I shall say something I have no business saying. On Thursday, then. Yes, Miss Fenn. What? You would say it, though, said the Duke of Greyshaw, on Thursday. Would you not? And she laughed wretchedly into her hands and did not answer, which was answer enough to carry a man home through the sleet. Thursday did not come first. The coin ball came first. He had accepted it in November, in the vague way of a man agreeing to a thing 4 months distant, and could not now withdraw without a public insult, and he stood in Mr. Coin's blazing new ballroom under 3 chandeliers of Bohemian crystal, and let the county pour past him, and thought about a crate in a soup shop. Miss Seraphina Coin was in white satin and pearls, and she was, he acknowledged, the handsomest thing in the north of England. She was also, that night, triumphant. Your Grace has heard, of course, she said, and her voice was pitched to carry, as a good singer's is. About the woman. Everything in Chester went very still. The soup, said Miss Coin, opening her fan. Cleeve Street is all come out. My father's clerk had it from the fish quay. A Miss Fenn, if you please. A clergyman's daughter, a nobody from one of your own cottages, your Grace, and she has been feeding half the yards for 3 winters, entirely without leave, entirely without a committee, entirely without a single respectable person to vouch for the propriety of it. Without leave, Chester repeated. Papa says it is a scandal in its way. The fan moved. One does not simply people, your Grace. One organizes. One inspects. Otherwise there is no telling who one is feeding, the idle with the deserving, and what becomes of their character then. She laughed silverly, and around her a dozen faces laughed too, because she was beautiful and rich, and it was her father's flaw. And there is worse. They say she has been seen a woman alone at night in that quarter, night after night. Alone, your Grace, with the dockmen. My mother says one cannot even pity her. She has thrown her name in the gutter with both hands, and no gentleman living could, Miss Coin. He did not raise his voice. He had never in his life needed to. The room heard the 2 words and turned like a field of wheat under a change of wind, and by the time Miss Seraphina Coin had finished her sentence, there was not a sound in that ballroom but the crystal ringing faintly overhead. How many blankets, said the Duke of Greyshaw, did your society distribute this quarter? She recovered handsomely. 90, your Grace, each embroidered, 90. He turned unhurried to the room. Miss Fenn has served, on my own reckoning, between 40 and 60 persons a night, from the first frost to the thaw for 3 winters. That is above 10,000 meals. She has taken no subscription. She has kept no committee. She has embroidered no device upon anything, and she's asked no living soul to be grateful to her, which I now perceive to be the single most aristocratic act I have witnessed in my life. Nobody breathed. She paid for it, he went on, out of £60 a year and her own dinner, while paying her rent to me punctually, so that I might stand in this room in a coat that would have fed Cleeve Street for a month, and be told that she has thrown her name in the gutter. He looked at the faces one by one, at Mr. Coin, purple above his cravat, at the mothers, at the fan. Gone still. You are quite right, Miss Coin. It is a scandal. It is the greatest scandal in the county, and I have been in the middle of it, asleep for 3 years, and every man and woman in this room has been asleep beside me. The difference between us and Miss Fenn is not that she is a nobody. It is that she was awake. Your Grace, said Mr. Coin thickly, in my house, in your house, Chester agreed, and I will not spoil your floor. I will say only this, and then I will go, and I will not come back. He took his gloves from under his arm. For 11 years you have all been very good as to tell me what a duchess must be. She must have blood, or she must have money, or she must have a face that will do in a portrait, and she must never, on any account, have been seen carrying anything heavier than a fan. He put on the first glove. I have found a woman who can reckon the cost of a man's life in oats, and who has been lifting a £30 pot alone since November, because no one in my county thought it worth their while to help her. If that is not fit to be a Duchess of Greyshaw, then the title is not fit to be worn, and I shall be very happy to give it up, and take a plain coat, and go and lift pots for the rest of my life. He put on the second glove. 90 blankets, Miss Coin. Do send them to Cleeve Street. She will find a use for them, and she will not tell anybody where they came from, which, I think, will be the first mercy you have ever been shown. And the Duke of Greyshaw walked out of the finest ballroom in the county, through 300 people, in absolute silence, and did not look back once. He knew it was a mistake before his carriage was out of the sweep. He sat back against the leather with the lights of the coin house burning behind him and understood, with the cold clarity that had made him formidable in the Lords and useless in every drawing room in England, that he had done the one thing she had begged the world not to do. He had put a name to it. He had put a bow on it. By noon tomorrow there would not be a house in the north that was not saying Miss Fenn and the Duke of Greyshaw in the same breath, and by Friday there would be a committee, and a subscription ball, and somebody would propose an inspection, and Mrs. Tarrant would be required to be grateful in front of 90 ladies who had never in their lives been hungry. He had defended her by destroying the only thing she had asked to keep. His aunt was waiting in the long drawing room at Greyshaw when he came in at 1 in the morning, upright in black silk before a dying fire, with the air of a woman who had been sitting in judgment since the invention of the county. "You have ruined yourself," said Lady Marchmore. "Very likely." 300 people, Kester. "Nearer 350, said the Duke of Greyshaw, and rang the bell. His aunt watched him, narrowly, while he gave his orders to a footman who had plainly been asleep 4 minutes earlier, the undergroom to be roused, a horse saddled, Mr. Ledwich, the attorney, to be brought out of his bed in the town and here, at Greyshaw within the hour, and to bring the deed box of the Cleeve Street properties, and to bring a clerk, and to bring candles enough for a long night. At 1 in the morning, said Lady Marchmore. "He may charge me for it. And what," she said, "do you imagine you are doing?" Kester stood at the cold hearth with his hands behind his back. "When I was a boy," he said, "you told me that a duke's first duty is that his people should not want. I have believed it all my life. I have believed it so thoroughly that I never once went down to Cleeve Street to see whether they wanted, because I had a steward, and the steward had returns, and the returns were satisfactory." He looked at the ashes. "A woman with £60 a year has done my duty for me for 3 winters, aunt in the dark with a ladle, and she paid me my rent while she did it. I have not been ruined tonight. I was ruined some years ago and nobody troubled to tell me." Lady Marchmore said nothing for a while. She was a hard old woman and an honest one, and the two had never been at war in her before. "And so you will marry her," she said at last, "if she will have me. Which she will not tonight, because tonight I have made her the property of the county, and she will never forgive me for it unless I can take it back." "You cannot take it back, it is said." "No," Kester agreed, "but I can make it worthless to them." He turned round, and his aunt saw his face, and afterwards told her sister that she had never in 40 years seen a vain look like that, and that it had frightened her considerably, and that she had liked it. "They will want to organize her," he said. "They will want to sit on a board and be photographed by the newspapers of posterity and tell hungry men what to feel. Very well. I shall buy the ground out from under them before they have finished their breakfast. A trust, aunt. Bought, conveyed, and charged upon my rents in perpetuity, with a rule written into it that no man relieved by it shall ever be inspected, improved, or made to say thank you, not by a committee, not by a duchess, not by me, one director, not removable, not advisable, not answerable to a soul on this earth, least of all to her husband, if she should ever be so unwise as to acquire one. And if she refuses you?" "Then it stands anyway," said the Duke of Greyshaw, "and Cleeve Street eats for 100 years, and I go back to being what I was, which is a man who dined on 11 courses while a clergyman's daughter carried a £30 pot alone since November." He took up the candle. "Good night, aunt. I am going to be extremely busy, and I am going to be very poor company for about 9 hours, and at 8 in the morning I am going to drive to Bracken Row." Lady Marchmore rose and gathered her black silk and went to the door, and there she stopped. "Kester, aunt." 90 blankets, said Lady Marchmore, with enormous distaste, with a device embroidered upon them. She lifted her chin exactly as another woman had lifted hers over a ladle, though she would have died before admitting the resemblance. "Send my carriage to Cleeve Street on Monday. And tell nobody. The attorney came at 2:30. The candles burned till dawn. He drove to Bracken Row at 8 in the morning through a thaw, unshaven, with a folded paper in his breast and no plan whatever beyond the door, and found her at the gate of a cottage with a mended roof and a starved little garden, in the grey cloak with her hands red to the wrist. She did not ask him in. "You have heard," he said. "Mrs. Odell's boy ran the whole way from the quay to tell me." Her face was white and perfectly composed. You stood up in Coyne's ballroom before 300 people and told them about the soup. I did. Why? Because a woman in white satin called you a scandal, said Kester, and I discovered that I would rather burn the county to the ground than let it stand. And now, said Honora Fenn, there will be a committee. Yes. And a subscription. I imagine so. And Mrs. Tarrant, she said, and her voice cracked at last, will have to stand up in front of 90 ladies and be grateful. No, said Kester. She will not. Honora looked at him. I have thought of nothing else since I left that room, he said. You told me the danger and I walked straight into it, and I have spent the night undoing what I could. Listen to me. He took the folded paper from his breast. The soup shop, and the 2 buildings beside it, and the coal yard behind are bought. They are conveyed to a trust. The trust has one rule written into it in language that no committee in England can get round. No person relieved by it shall ever be required to attend, to thank, to be inspected, to be improved, or to be looked at. Not once. Not by me. Not by anybody. She did not take the paper. And the money? She said. Charged upon the Greyshaw rents in perpetuity, so that it does not depend upon any man's whim, including my own, and cannot be withdrawn by my heirs if they turn out to be fools. He paused. There is a further clause. The trust is directed by one person who may not be removed, and who may not be advised, and whose accounts I am expressly forbidden to see. That is madness. That is a duchess, said Kester Vane. The thaw dripped from the eaves. Somewhere down Bracken Row a dog was barking at nothing. You cannot buy me, said Honora Fenn, very low. No, he said, and I have taken great pains not to. That deed stands whether you have me or not. Read it. It is not conditional upon anything. If you send me away this morning and never speak to me again, Cleeve Street eats for 100 years. And Mrs. Tarrant will never once be told to be grateful, and I shall go back to Greyshaw and be exactly what I was before you told me to lift a pot. Only I shall know for the rest of my life that I was not equal to you. His jaw tightened. So there is nothing here to buy you with. There is only me, and I am asking. She was crying and furious about it, scrubbing at her face with the back of a red hand. Do you know what they will say, she said, about you? A duke and a soup woman. They will say I trapped you. They will say I hunted you with a ladle. For the rest of your life, at every table, Miss Fenn, said Kester, I have been hunted by experts. I know precisely what it feels like, and I have never once in your company felt anything but fed. She laughed. It came out of her like a sob and turned halfway into a laugh, and he had never heard a better sound in his life. You are a very stupid man, said Honora Fenn. I am reliably informed, said the Duke of Greyshaw, that I have a face like the north wall of a church. You have, she said. You have exactly that, and I have been looking at it across 4 coppers all winter, and it is the only face in this county that has never once looked at me as though I were a curiosity. She pressed her lips together and lifted her chin, that same lift. The one he had seen with the ladle in her hand, and it went through him now as it had then. Thursday, she said. You said you would say nothing until Thursday. It is Thursday. Honora Fenn stopped. She looked at the sky as though the sky might contradict him, and she looked at the frozen ruts, and at the cottage with its mended roof, and then she looked at him and said, so it is, and she came through the gate. He did not touch her. He wanted to. He had wanted to since the night she told him to sit down and be useful. But he stood in the mud at Bracken Row with his hat in his hand and let her come, because he had learned in one winter of pots and turnips that everything worth having in this world is given and not taken. She stopped an arm's length from him. I have red hands, she said, and I smell of herring, and I own 2 gowns. You own a city, said the Duke of Greyshaw, and it does not know it yet. And Honora Fenn put her red hand into his, and he closed his fingers round it, very carefully, as though it were made of something rarer than any stone in the Greyshaw vault, and he bent his head over it, and the thaw dripped from the eaves of the cottage, and the dog went on barking down Bracken Row at nothing at all. They were married in April, in the small church at Bracken Row where her father had preached, with the door open because there was not room inside, and the whole of Cleeve Street standing in the churchyard in the wet grass, and Mrs. Tarrant weeping so loudly at the back that the curate had to raise his voice. Lady Marchmore sat in the front pew in black silk and wept at nothing whatever and denied it for the rest of her life. There were no 90 ladies. 2 came at their own request, having written first, and were made welcome, and afterwards worked in the soup shop for 6 weeks and never told a soul, which was the only sort of penance the new Duchess of Greyshaw would accept. Miss Seraphina Coyne did not come. She married 2 years later a baronet with a good house and a bad temper, and grew old in a drawing room, and was heard, in her 50s, to remark that the Duchess of Greyshaw had always been shockingly plain, and was heard by nobody, because by then the county had made up its mind. The county had made up its mind on a Tuesday in the second winter, when the fever came through the yards and Kester Vane carried a woman he had never met out of a flooded lodging house with her arms round his neck, and set her down in a room in his own city that his wife had built for exactly that purpose, and went back for the next one, and when he came out at 4 in the morning, grey to the elbows, and found the Duchess of Greyshaw at the trestle with a ladle, ordering him, in front of everybody, to sit down and eat something, befell over. He sat down. He ate. It was oats and salt and a little fat, and he had eaten 11 courses at Greyshaw that had not been half so good. "You are staring," said Honora, without looking up. "I am," said Kester. "At what?" "At my equal," said the Duke of Greyshaw. And Honora Vane, Duchess of Greyshaw, in a grey cloak with the hem turned twice, because she would not have a new one while the coal was dear, put down the ladle at last, and came and stood behind his chair, and laid her cracked red hand on his shoulder in front of 40 people who did not push. He covered it with his own. Nobody thanked her that night either. She had made it so that nobody had to. But when she was very old, and the coppers had been going on Cleeve Street for 50 winters, and there were 3 streets and a school and a fever house that bore no name at all, because she would not permit it, the men of the yards, who did not remove their caps for princes, removed them for a small stooped woman in a grey cloak every time as she passed, and the Duke of Greyshaw, who had a face like the north wall of a church and who had smiled, by his wife's reckoning, perhaps 400 times in his life, and every one of them at her, would walk beside her with her arm through his, and would look at them looking at her, and would think, as he had thought on the coldest night of the coldest winter in 9 years, that he had gone out into the sleet to find out who was feeding his poor, and had found his wife.